The ice cracked like gunshots under 12-year-old Katsumoto's wooden clogs as he broke the frozen surface of the neighborhood fire tank. March 9th, 1945, 10:30 p.m. A bone-piercing wind howled through Tokyo's paper-thin wooden houses. Above, the stars were unnaturally bright. "Katsumoto, check the pump again," his father ordered, his hand resting on the imperial chrysanthemum crest mounted on their sole water pump, their proud defense. Around them, the nightly ritual unfolded. Neighbors clutched bamboo spears, practicing thrusts. Mrs. Tanaka instructed her 8-year-old daughter, "Aim for the belly, Aiko-chan. American soldiers are soft there." 6 blocks away, 6-year-old Shizuko Nishio arranged paper flowers for her birthday tomorrow, her mother folding origami cranes and whispering, "Make a wish, little bird." The radio crackled with static, then an announcement. "Enemy formations moving away from the capital. Citizens may rest peacefully." The collective sigh of relief was almost tangible. They believed their spirit, their drills, and their bamboo were enough. They believed they were safe. But 25,000 feet above, in a silence broken only by the roar of engines, a different ritual was underway. Captain John Andrews of the 314th Bombardment Wing peered down at the glittering dark expanse of Tokyo. His B-29 superfortress, named Dauntless Dottie, felt strangely light and vulnerable. General Curtis LeMay's radical order had stripped them of all defensive guns and armor plating. The bomb bays now groaned with a new cargo, clusters of M69 napalm incendiaries. Andrews knew the math. 334 bombers, 1,665 tons of jellied gasoline. His briefing was clinical. Target convergence, wind speed, burn radius. They weren't aiming for docks or factories tonight. The lead Pathfinder planes were not carrying explosives. Their target was a dense residential grid of wood and paper marked on his map as Target Area 1. The radio interrupts the quiet. "Pathfinders are in position. Release markers on my mark." The first canisters fell, not with a scream, but in near silence, tumbling into the darkness. Below, Katsumoto's little sister pointed at the sky and giggled. "Look, Christmas tinsel." Brilliant, slow-burning flares erupted into a giant, shimmering X that silently painted a crosshair over Shizuko's house, Mrs. Tanaka's street, and Katsumoto's fire tank. The beautiful, descending light was not a warning. It was an invitation for hell to follow. While Tokyo slept under its illusion of safety, a world away in the Utah desert, science was conducting a grim rehearsal. In a classified sector of the Dugway Proving Ground, American engineers had built Japanese Village, perfect replicas of Tokyo's residential architecture using traditional wood, shoji paper screens, and tatami mats. Their task was not theoretical. Led by experts like Dr. L.M.K. Bolter, they set the models ablaze again and again, timing the flame spread with stopwatches, measuring thermal updrafts with anemometers, and calculating the precise cocktail of explosives and napalm needed to create an unstoppable firestorm. The goal was to overcome a simple equation. Tokyo had only 8,000 firefighters for 4 million people, with water pressure so weak it couldn't reach a second-story window. The solution was a new weapon, the M69 incendiary. Dropped in clusters, each bomb would split open, scattering 38 individual napalm canisters designed to ignite on impact and spray a sticky, burning gel that couldn't be extinguished with water. It was warfare reduced to a physics problem. Given density X, 750,000 people per square mile, material Y, wood/paper, and wind Z, 65 miles per hour northerly, calculate the required incendiary tonnage. The answer was 1,665 tons. General Curtis LeMay, studying the final reports in his Guam headquarters, saw not a city of people, but a system of vulnerable variables. His gamble was total. Strip the B-29s, fly them low at night, and trust the calculations from Utah. The military's conscience was quieted by another number, a projected 1 million American casualties in a planned invasion of Japan. Burning Tokyo, they rationalized, was the lesser evil. Back in Tokyo's Shitamachi district, 24-year-old librarian Hashimoto Yoshiko performed her own calculations. She inventoried her civilian fire brigade's equipment, 12 leather buckets, 30 sandbags, and 2 shared sets of duty. Her responsibility was 10 city blocks. She reviewed the official manual, isolate and smother small fires before they join. It was a doctrine based on facing scattered magnesium-based incendiaries from earlier, less effective raids. As she checked the water level in the neighborhood's concrete tank, she felt a strange sense of foreboding. The wind was picking up, howling through the telegraph wires with a menacing pitch. It was the same wind the American meteorologists had tracked and waited for, the perfect firestorm wind. Yoshiko gathered her brigade, mostly elderly men and housewives, for a final briefing. "Remember," she said, her voice steady but her hands cold, "speed is everything. We must be like water itself, flowing to each small flame." She did not know that the enemy had already calculated the exact wind speed that would render her speed meaningless, turning isolated fires into a single roaring front within minutes. The defense plan in her hands, based on past threats, was already obsolete. The attack plan speeding toward her through the night, based on stolen architectural blueprints and meteorological espionage, was horrifyingly current. The disconnect was absolute and fatal. At that moment, high above the Pacific, the lead Pathfinder bombardier aligned his sight not with any factory or dockyard, but the intersection of 2 narrow streets in Yoshiko's ward, his crosshairs hovering over the library she was sworn to protect. The final hour, before midnight, was a masterclass in tragic normalcy. Across Shitamachi, families performed their well-rehearsed routines, trusting in the system that had promised protection. Katsumoto's teacher, Mr. Yamada, inspected the school's fire buckets, lining them up with military precision. He had just finished leading 30 children in a drill, their small hands passing leather buckets in a human chain, while they chanted in unison, "Nippon Ichiban, Japan is number 1. "The American bombs are cowardly," he assured his students, his voice firm with conviction. "But our spirit is like water. It can extinguish any fire." He genuinely believed it. The statistics he did not know told a different story. Only 17 fire stations for 220 square miles of the city, water mains that would burst under the heat, and a fire department whose most powerful trucks could barely project water higher than a second-story window. In the Nishio household, the mood was still festive. Shizuko's mother finished the last origami crane, placing it atop the pile of paper flowers. She helped her daughter into the thick, padded mofuku, the official air raid clothing designed to protect against shrapnel and flying debris. The clumsy outfit made Shizuko giggle. "I look like a little bear." Her mother smiled, smoothing down the fabric, not knowing the synthetic additives in the napalm's gel would make it bond ferociously to this very cloth. On the radio, a calm voice repeated earlier assurances, lulling the city into a final, false sense of security. The psychological conditioning was complete. To flee was shameful. To doubt was disloyal. The entire district, from children to elders, stood mentally prepared to fight the fires with buckets and wet rags, their resolve a fortress built on sand. At 11:50 p.m., the first distant, undulating wail of the air raid sirens cut through the night. It was met not with panic, but with a weary sense of routine. "Again?" sighed Katsumoto's father, looking up from mending a fishing net. "They always turn away." He instructed his family to take their positions by the water pump as a precaution. Hashimoto Yoshiko, at the library, heard the sirens and felt her stomach tighten. This time the wind felt different, stronger, drier, more predatory. She ordered her brigade to don their hoppy totes, marked with the fireman's crest. As she tightened the strap on her helmet, she glanced at the bookshelves, a silent promise to protect them. At that exact moment, high above Tokyo Bay, the lead Pathfinder B-29, the Lady of the Lake, reached its initial point. The bombardier, Captain Robert Brown, peered into the Norden bomb site. The crosshairs settled not on the indistinct dark mass of the city, but on the brilliant silver ribbon where the Sumida River reflected the moonlight, a perfect geographical reference. His target was a residential grid 300 meters east of that point. In the bomb bay, the special canisters were not armed with explosives, but with electronic flares and white phosphorus. His finger hovered over the release. Below, 6-year-old Shizuko, now in her bulky padded suit, knelt with her mother before the family's small Shinto altar. They clapped their hands twice, bowed their heads, and prayed for safety and a happy birthday. Her mother's whispered prayer for protection was drowned out by a new sound, not from the sirens, but from the sky itself, a deep, humming thunder growing steadily closer, the sound of 334 Wright cyclone engines descending through the thin, cold air. The illusion shattered a second before the first marker flare ignited. The safety they believed in was a door that had already been locked from the outside. At 12:08 a.m., the night sky over Tokyo transformed into a spectacle of macabre beauty. The Pathfinder B-29s, flying precise parallel tracks, began ejecting their loads. Long canisters tumbled silently, then split open high above the rooftops. From within, not bombs, but hundreds of floating magnesium flares and white phosphorus markers ignited, suspended on small parachutes. They drifted down like a slow-motion cascade of diamonds and liquid silver, painting the darkness with an eerie, shimmering glow. In his second-floor room, young Katsumoto Seotum pressed his face against the cold window, mesmerized. "It's like Tanabata stars," he whispered, referring to the Festival of Stars. His little sister giggled, enchanted by the silent, sparkling display. Below, in the streets, people peered upwards, momentarily disarmed by the sight. This was not the screaming dive of explosives they feared. It felt almost ceremonial. But on the ground, the first markers struck. White phosphorus, burning at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, embedded itself in wooden shingles and shoji paper. It couldn't be extinguished. Water only made it burn fiercer, spreading its glowing elemental fury. Within minutes, 2 brilliant crossing lines of fire etched a gargantuan flaming X across the heart of Shitamachi. This was not a weapon of destruction itself. It was a signature, a bullseye painted with incandescent ink. For the crews of the 300 B-29s now entering their final bombing run, the burning X was a perfect visual beacon. For the 750,000 people living inside its perimeter, it was the perimeter of a trap that had just been sprung. Hashimoto Yoshiko, standing in the street with her brigade, watched the markers fall with a professional's eye that quickly turned to dread. She understood targeting. This was not the scattered, haphazard approach of prior raids. The meticulous, geometric placement of the fires signaled a new, terrifying level of coordination. "They are marking the area," she shouted over the growing murmur of the crowd. "They are marking us." Her official training crumbled under the weight of this realization. The manual said nothing about being inside a designated kill box. Before her team could even react, a new sound emerged, a soft, rustling whisper from above, like a heavy rain, but drier. The first M69 cluster bombs began to strike. They hit with a series of dull thuds, not the sharp cracks of high explosives. Each cylindrical bomb split open at 2,000 feet, scattering 38 napalm canisters in a wide ellipse. These smaller units plummeted, piercing roofs with a sound like tearing canvas. Then came the ignition, a soft whoomp as each canister erupted, spewing a thick, jellied stream of gasoline and thickener that instantly clung to every surface. Hashimoto watched, paralyzed for a crucial second as a canister hit the roof of the community bathhouse across the street. The fire didn't start in one spot. It painted the entire structure in a single violent stroke, the flames leaping 30 feet into the air with a voracious roar. The heat hit her face like a physical slap. The small, containable fires from the manuals did not exist here. This was a wall of flame, growing, merging, and feeding on the gale force wind. Her leather bucket felt like a child's toy. The calculation from Utah was now a living, breathing, and roaring reality on her street.
The separate fires, birthed by thousands of napalm canisters, stopped being individual blazes within minutes. Driven by the 65-mile-per-hour wind, they reached for each other across narrow alleys and over tiled roofs, merging into a single advancing front of flame. Katsumoto's world shrank to the heat on his face and the panicked grip of his father's hand. The family's planned escape route, a straight bash to the Sumida River, was already a memory. A river of fire now flowed down their street, consuming houses with a sound like an endless freight train. The air itself became a weapon, superheated to the point where distant wooden structures spontaneously burst into flames without being touched. Katsumoto saw Mrs. Tanaka, her bamboo spear now a torch, trying to beat back flames crawling up her daughter's mofuku. The padded clothing, meant to protect, acted like a wick. The scene seared into his mind just before a collapsing telegraph pole crashed between them, cutting off the view with a curtain of sparks. His father yelled a new command: "Forget the river, to the school grounds." It was the official contingency. A large, open space was supposed to act as a fire break. They joined a stampede of neighbors, all clinging to the same doomed idea, their buckets and wet towels abandoned, their orderly drills replaced by primal survival instinct. For Hashimoto Yoshiko and her fire brigade, the theory of firefighting collided with the physics of a firestorm. Their canvas hoses shriveled and smoked before water could even flow. The leather buckets dried and cracked in seconds. The crucial tactic of creating a wet barrier between houses was impossible. The radiant heat ignited buildings 2 streets away. "The water tank! Form a line to the tank!" Yoshiko screamed, her voice raw from smoke. Her brigade managed a desperate human chain. But when the first bucket was lowered into the large concrete community water tank, their primary defensive resource, it met not with cool resistance, but with a scalding geyser of steam. Yoshiko pushed forward and thrust her hand in. The water was not just hot, it was actively boiling from the ambient radiant heat, a bubbling, terrifying cauldron. In that moment, all her training, all her dutiful preparation evaporated. The element meant to be their salvation had been turned against them by the sheer thermal output of the inferno. The foundation of civil defense was literally boiling away. A deafening roar grew overhead as a thermal column, a vortex of superheated air and burning debris, began to suck up embers and tiles to rain them down miles away. The fire was no longer just burning the city, it was creating its own atmosphere, a self-sustaining system of destruction where every human action was rendered meaningless.
The frantic exodus toward the Sumida River became a river of humanity itself, clogging the narrow streets with a current of desperation. Katsumoto, his face smudged with soot, was carried along, his hand locked in his father's vice-like grip. His mother shepherded his younger sister on her back. The official doctrine pounded into them was clear: find wide water. The river was the ultimate firebreak, a symbol of salvation. As they neared the riverbank, a surge of relief washed over the crowd. They could see the dark, wide expanse of water. but as they pushed onto the open embankment, the relief curdled into confusion, then horror. The river did not offer a cool refuge. A shimmering, oppressive heat haze rose from its surface. The water was not calm, it churned with unnatural movement. Dozens of people were already in it, not swimming, but thrashing and screaming. The river was hot. Steam rolled off it in great, ghostly sheets. The bombs had raised the temperature of the massive waterway to a lethal simmer. Those who had jumped in seeking relief were now being scalded alive. Katsumoto's father skidded to a halt, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror. The fire was at their backs, a wall of roaring orange. The promised safety in front of them was a boiling cauldron. They were trapped on a narrow strip of land between two deaths. "The bridge we must cross!" Katsumoto's father yelled, pointing to the nearest metal girder bridge, its outlines visible through the smoke. It was their last terrible option. The bridge's surface was packed with a stalled mass of people, all thinking the same thing. As they forced their way onto the structure, the heat radiating from the metal grillwork seeped through their wooden clogs. Halfway across, a collective scream erupted from the front. The metal framework, heated from the inferno raging on the far bank, was reaching its failure point. The painted handrails began to smoke. Katsumoto's father looked down and cried out. The soles of his shoes were melting, sticking to the steel deck plates with each agonizing step. Ahead, a woman's kimono sleeve brushed against a girder and burst into flame. In that moment of chaos, Katsumoto felt his father's grip tighten painfully, then vanish. A surge in the panicked crowd, a cry from his mother, and he was falling. He tumbled through a gap between the girders, a fleeting glimpse of his sister's terrified face looking down at him before he hit the dark, hot water below. The shock of the heat was a physical blow, but the current, swollen with debris and bodies, pulled him away from the bridge. Gasping and burning, he surfaced just in time to see the central span of the bridge, glowing a dull cherry red, sag, and then collapse with a monstrous metallic groan into the river, taking hundreds, including his family, with it. A stranger's arm hooked around his chest, pulling him toward a tangled mass of wreckage. "Hold on, boy," a raspy voice commanded. Katsumoto clung to the debris, watching the heart of his world disappear into fire and steam. The man who saved him died of his burns before dawn, nameless, leaving the 12-year-old completely alone in a boiling river at the edge of hell. By 2 a.m., the firestorm achieved its full, horrifying maturity. It was no longer a collection of fires, but a single living entity that breathed in oxygen and exhaled pure death. At its core, temperatures exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than a blast furnace. The laws of the ordinary world dissolved. Glass windows in the few concrete buildings didn't shatter. They melted and flowed down walls like viscous black water. Asphalt streets boiled, trapping those who had fallen. The air itself became unbreathable, sucked into the convective column, leaving pockets where survivors simply suffocated before the flames ever reached them. In the designated safe zone of an Asakusa temple courtyard, 6-year-old Shizuko Nishio huddled with her mother and dozens of others. The fire, guided by the tornado-force winds, did not respect the open space. Instead, it leaped across in a wave of radiant heat so intense it ignited clothing and hair from a distance of 30 feet. Shizuko felt her mother's grip tighten, then suddenly go limp as her padded mofuku burst into flames. The last thing she saw before scrambling under a stone water basin was her mother transforming into a silent, burning silhouette against a white-hot sky. Around her, human figures ran in circles, became living torches, and then crumpled into silent, smoldering piles. The sound was a deep planetary roar, mixed with the popping of skulls and the hiss of boiling fluids. The fire was not just killing, it was systematically erasing all physical evidence of life. Dawn, when it came, revealed not a city scarred, but a landscape annihilated. The flames had consumed everything combustible, leaving only a vast, flat plain of gray ash, still smoking, stretching to the horizon. Twisted metal skeletons of streetcars and the blackened concrete pillars of bridges stood as grotesque monuments. Rescue workers, where they could penetrate, found the dead in tableaus of frozen agony. In schoolyards and temple grounds, the official safe zones, piles of bodies were stacked 2 meters high, families fused together by melted flesh and bone into single unidentifiable masses. They had died exactly as instructed, collectively, and were cooked in the ovens the open spaces became. Firefighter Hashimoto Yoshiko was found in the doorway of the vanished library. Her body was curled in a protective circle around a single, partially charred book, a volume of children's poetry. Everything else, every scroll, novel, and family record she had sworn to protect, had been vaporized into the fine ash that now coated everything. For Katsumoto, dawn meant the slow, horrifying realization that he was alone. Clinging to a charred timber in the now cooling river, he scanned the banks. Where his neighborhood had been was a featureless waste. No landmarks, no streets, no houses, only ash, and here and there the familiar shape of a melted water pump or the charcoal outline of a bamboo spear. The world of wood and paper and family was gone. In its place was a silent, gray nothingness. The bombing had stopped, but the burning inside him was just beginning.
Katsumoto Siotum did not die on March 10, 1945. The boy who fell into the boiling river was pulled out by fate, but his childhood remained there, buried under the ashes of Shitamachi. Orphaned and mute with shock for weeks, he was sent to live with a distant relative in the countryside, yet he could not escape the burning city. It lived in his dreams, in the smell of charred wood, in the hollow space where his family should have been. This unbearable weight forged a singular purpose in him. He became a collector of ghosts. As an adult, first as a journalist, then an award-winning writer, he dedicated his life to one task: preserving the voices of that night. For decades, he tracked down survivors, the woman who survived by hiding in a sewer as the street above melted, the fireman who saw his entire company vaporized, the child who, like him, lost everyone. He filled notebooks with their testimonies, not of strategy or politics, but of last words, lost birthdays, and the feel of a mother's hand. People must know what this was like, he would write, not as numbers in a report, but as the story of Shizuko, who wanted a birthday, or Mrs. Tanaka, who practiced with a bamboo spear. The statistics are the skeleton. These memories are the soul. Without them, history is a ghost story with no ghosts. His work became a bridge across the silence, ensuring the 100,000 were remembered not as a casualty figure, but as a mosaic of shattered lives. Shizuko Nishio, the sole survivor of her kindergarten class, was found 3 days later wandering in a daze through the smoldering ruins. She carried the invisible scars for 80 years. In 2022, at the age of 83, she stood before a glass museum case containing an M69 napalm canister. Her hands trembled. On a monitor nearby played news footage from Ukraine. Children huddled in a subway-turned shelter, their faces smudged with fear and dust. Shizuko looked from the canister to the screen and whispered to her granddaughter, "That is me. That little girl is me." Her personal trauma had become a universal warning. The strategic success of Operation Meeting House was coldly undeniable. It broke civilian will and became the blueprint for firebombing 66 Japanese cities. Yet its legacy is a shadow that stretches into modern warfare. No official memorial stood for its victims for decades. They were the forgotten cost of a necessary victory. Today,
Military planners still study the tactics of area bombing and mass incendiary use for their devastating effect on morale. But the true, enduring legacy lies not in the manuals of war, but in the plea of survivors like Shizuko and Katsumoto. It lives in the quiet terror of a grandmother seeing history repeat, and in the relentless drive of a writer who turned his own ashes into ink. They ask not for judgment, but for witness, to remember that behind every tactical innovation, behind every strategic necessity, are real people who on the night before a birthday looked at the sky and saw it rain beautiful, deadly light.